Hello everybody, before we dive into today's video, we're very happy to introduce one of our favorite sponsors to work with, the historic city of Quincy, Massachusetts. And yes, contrary to popular belief, both the city and the middle name of the United States' sixth president, John Quincy Adams, is supposed to be pronounced Quincy, not Quincy. In any event, ever wondered where the story of America's leadership took root? Quincy is that place. This city is home to the Adams National Historic Park, which preserves the home of Presidents John Adams and John Quincy Adams, two of America's founding fathers. You can explore the birthplaces of these iconic leaders and walk the same halls as they once did, immersing yourself in the beginnings of the United States. But Quincy isn't all about the past. It's a city that beautifully blends history with present-day adventures and experiences. From the iconic USS Salem to the stunning views of the Blue Hills and the architectural elegance of the Thomas Crane Library and Old City Hall, there's something here for everyone. And let's not forget the Epicurean delight that is Quincy's food scene. With an array of global and local flavors, it's a culinary journey that you can't miss. To discover more about what Quincy has in store for you, check out discoverquincy.com. It's time to step into history and create some unforgettable memories. Now let's get into today's video. Every hero needs his trusty sidekick. After all, where would Batman be without Robin, Holmes without Watson, Frodo without Sam, or Han without Chewbacca? In real life, however, sidekicks seldom get top billing no matter how vital their contributions, and even when their names are widely known, their lives and accomplishments are often overlooked next to those of their more illustrious colleagues. Most pertinent to the topic at hand today, on March the 10th, 1876, history was forever changed when inventor Alexander Graham Bell, working in a drafty loft in Boston, spoke the immortal words, "Mr. Watson, come here, I need to see you." To his joy, the Watson in question, his assistant Thomas A. Watson, rushed up from the floor below, having heard Bell's words clearly over the newfangled electrical device the pair were tinkering with. Bell and Watson had just proven the viability of the telephone, an invention that would revolutionize global communications. But Thomas Watson was far more than the recipient of history's first telephone call. An accomplished inventor and industrialist in his own right, he was responsible for many innovations that made the telephone a practical communications technology, and used his telephone royalties to found one of America's greatest shipyards, which helped make the US a global naval superpower. This is the story of history's other greatest forgotten sidekick with the surname Watson. Thomas Augustus Watson was born on January the 18th, 1854 in Salem, Massachusetts. The son of a livery stable owner, at the age of 13 he dropped out of school to enter the workforce, a formative experience he later came to look upon fondly. As he stated in a 1913 speech, "I realize now what a lucky boy I was when at 13 years of age I had to leave school and go to work for my living, although I didn't think so at the time. I am not advising my young friends to leave school at this age, for they may not have the opportunity to enter college as I did at 40. After trying several vocations, clerking, bookkeeping, carpentering, etc., and finding them all unattractive, I at last found just the job that suited me in the electrical workshop of Charles Williams at 109 Court Street, Boston, one of the best men I have ever known." Watson was immediately put to work at $5 a week machining binding posts for electrical equipment. It was tedious and exacting work and often hazardous, as Watson would later recall. "The mechanics of today with their automatic screw machines hardly know what it is to turn little rough castings with a hand tool. How the hot chips used to fly into our eyes. One day I had a fine idea. I bought a pair of 25-cent goggles, thinking the others would hail me as the benefactor of mankind and adopt my plan. But they laughed at me for being such a sissy boy, and public opinion forced me back to the old-time honored plan of winking when I saw a chip coming. It was not an efficient plan, for the chip usually got there first." Despite these challenges, Watson thrived in Williams's shop and was quickly promoted to machining all manner of complex parts, particularly keys, bells, armatures, and other components for telegraphs. Williams encouraged his workers to tinker when business was slow, and Watson took this opportunity to design and build himself a small working steam engine. This engine, Watson later claimed, planted the seeds of his later industrial endeavors. But in the end, Watson's fortunes would come by way of the shop's more unusual customers. He states, "Besides the regular work at Williams, there was a constant stream of wild-eyed inventors with big ideas in their heads and little money in their pockets, coming to the shop to have their ideas tried out in brass and iron. Most of them had an angel whom they had hypnotized into paying the bills. My enthusiasm, and perhaps my sympathetic nature, made me a favorite workman with those men of visions, and in 1873 to 1874, my work had become largely making experimental apparatuses for such men. Few of their ideas ever amounted to anything, but I liked to do the work as it kept me roaming in fresh fields and pastures new all the time. Had it not been, however, for my youthful enthusiasm, always one of my chief assets, I fear this experience would have made me so skeptical and cynical as to the value of electrical inventions that my future prospects might have been injured. In 1875, Watson's skills brought him to the attention of Alexander Graham Bell, a Scottish-born inventor and speech instructor at the Boston School for Deaf Mutes. At this point, Bell was not yet working on the telephone. Instead, he was attempting to develop a harmonic telegraph which would send multiple messages over a single wire. The year before, inventor Thomas Edison had developed a quadruplex telegraph and sold it to the Atlantic and Pacific Telegraph Company, giving them an enormous advantage over their main rival, Western Union. However, as telegraph traffic across the United States continued to increase, even quadruplex telegraphs soon became overwhelmed, creating demand for systems that could multiplex an even greater number of signals. Bell's idea was to send each signal at a different frequency, generated by vibrating electromagnet-driven reed. At the other end of the line, only a receiver tuned to the same frequency as a particular transmitter would receive that particular signal, meaning an effectively unlimited number of signals could be sent over the same line. Bell's research was funded by his future father-in-law, lawyer and financier Gardner Green Hubbard. At first, Bell merely tasked Watson with manufacturing components for his telegraph prototypes, but later he hired him as his full-time assistant, the pair working out of Bell's laboratory in the attic of his boarding house at 5 Exeter Place. They mostly worked in the evenings after Bell had finished work at the Boston School. Shortly after forming his partnership, Bell revealed to Watson a new idea he had been pondering. I listened, I suspected somewhat languidly, for I must have been working that day about 16 hours with only a short nutritive interval, and Bell had already given me, during the weeks we had worked together, more new ideas on a great variety of subjects, including visible speech, elocution, and flying machines than my brain could assimilate. But when he went on to say that he had an idea by which he believed it would be possible to talk by telegraph, my nervous system got such a shock that the tired feeling vanished. I have never forgotten his exact words. They have run in my mind ever since like a mathematical formula. If, he said, I could make a current of electricity vary in intensity precisely as the air varies in density during the production of a sound, I should be able to transmit speech telegraphically. He then sketched for me an instrument that he thought would do this, and we discussed the possibility of constructing one. I did not make it was altogether too costly, and the chances of it working too uncertain to impress his financial backers, Mr. Gardner G. Hubbard and Mr. Thomas Sanders, who were insisting that the wisest thing for Bell to do was to perfect the harmonic telegraph. Then he would have money and leisure enough to build air castles like the telephone. Unfortunately, the harmonic telegraph proved a tougher problem to crack than expected, and more than a year passed during which the pair made scarcely any progress. Ironically, however, it was the temperamental harmonic telegraph which led directly to Bell and Watson's greatest discovery. As Watson later recalled, on the afternoon of June 2, 1875, we were hard at work on the same old job, testing some modification of the instruments. I had charge of the transmitters as usual, setting them squealing one after the other, while Bell was returning the receiver springs one by one, pressing them against his ear as I have described. One of the transmitter springs I was attending to stopped vibrating, and I plucked it to start it again. It didn't start, and I kept on plucking it, when suddenly I heard a shout from Bell in the next room, and then out he came with a rush, demanding, "What did you do then? Don't change anything, let me see." I showed him it was very simple. The contact screw was screwed down so far that it made permanent contact with the spring, so that when I snapped the spring, the circuit had remained unbroken while the strip of magnetized steel, by its vibration over the pole of its magnet, was generating that marvelous conception of Bell's, a current of electricity that varied in intensity precisely as the air was varying in density within hearing distance of that spring. That undulating current had passed through the connecting wire to the distant receiver, which, fortunately, was a mechanism that could transform the current back into an extremely faint echo of the sound of the vibrating spring that had generated it. But what was still more fortunate, the right man had that mechanism at his ear during that fleeting moment, and instantly recognized the transcendent importance of that faint sound thus electrically transmitted. The speaking telephone was born at that moment. Bell knew perfectly well that the mechanism that could transmit that all the complex vibrations of one sound could do the same for any sound, even that of speech. Seizing upon this breakthrough, Bell and Watson immediately constructed a prototype which they called the Gallows Telephone, consisting of a thin membrane or diaphragm connected to a magnet sliding inside a coil of wire. Sound would induce vibrations in the diaphragm and magnet, causing the coil to generate a varying electrical current. This current would then be converted back into sound by an identical device at the other end of the transmission line. Unfortunately, the device was not sensitive enough to pick up the nuances of the human voice and transmitted only vague, incomprehensible noises. But Bell and Watson knew they were on the right track, and after another year of experimentation, they came up with a new design working on a different principle. Known as the liquid transmitter, this device replaced the magnet and coil with a needle attached to the diaphragm on one end and immersed in a container of sulfuric acid on the other. Current from the battery was passed from the needle through the acid to an electrode below, with the whole circuit being connected by a wire to an electromagnetic receiver installed in the cellar of the boarding house. When the diaphragm vibrated, so did the needle in the acid, varying the resistance of the circuit and the current in the wire. This system was much more sensitive and produced a more powerful signal than the Gallows telephone, which was limited by the relatively low amount of mechanical energy generated by the human voice. However, before they could construct this new model, Bell and Watson learned that a rival inventor, Elisha Gray, was very close to perfecting his own telephone. Bell thus rushed to the patent office without even having a working prototype, narrowly beating Gray to the punch. Bell's master patent for the telephone was thus issued on March 7, 1876. 3 days later, Bell and Watson made history. As the story goes, that afternoon, Bell was working on the transmitter in the attic while Watson made adjustments to the receiver in the cellar below. At some point, Bell accidentally spilled some acid from the transmitter onto himself and in frustration uttered those immortal words, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." Sometimes recorded as "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Whatever the exact words, down in the cellar, Watson was shocked to hear Bell's words coming clearly through the receiver and rushed upstairs to answer his employer's summons. Quite by accident, the pair had conducted history's first phone call. From this breakthrough moment, progress was very swift. On June the 25th of that year, Bell demonstrated the telephone before stunned crowds at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, while on October the 9th, he and Watson succeeded in holding a conversation over a 2-mile telephone line strung between Boston and Cambridge. And so it was that in 1877, Bell formed the Bell Telephone Company, while in 1878, the first commercial telephone exchange was installed in New Haven, Connecticut. The new technology spread quickly around the world, making Bell and Watson very wealthy men. But Thomas Watson's role in the telephone story did not end with manufacturing the first prototypes. Though he and Bell had created a machine capable of transmitting the human voice over long distances, as a practical appliance it still had many shortcomings. As Watson later wrote, "It began to dawn on us that people engaged in getting their living in the ordinary walks of life couldn't be expected to keep the telephone at their ear all the time waiting for a call. So it devolved on me to get up some sort of a call signal. Williams, on his line, used to call by thumping the diaphragm through the mouthpiece with the butt of a lead pencil. If there was someone close to the telephone at the other end, and it was very still, it did pretty well, but it seriously damaged the vitals of the machine. And besides, we might have to supply a pencil with every telephone, and that would be expensive. Then I rigged a little hammer inside the box with a button on the outside. When the button was thumped, the hammer would hit the side of the diaphragm where it could not be damaged. The usual electrical transformation took place, and a much more modest, but still unmistakable thump would issue from the telephone at the other end. That was the first calling apparatus ever devised for use with the telephone. But the exacting public wanted something better, and I devised the Watson buzzer, the only practical use we ever made of the Harmonic Telegraph relics. It was a vast improvement on the Watson thumper, but still it didn't take the popular fancy. It brought me only a fleeting fame, for I soon superseded it by a magneto-electric call bell that solved the problem, and was destined to make a long-suffering public turn cranks for the next 15 years or so, as it never had before or ever will hereafter. In the end, Watson would be awarded a total of 35 patents for various improvements to the telephone, including buzzers and bells, an automatic switch to cut off the line when the receiver was hung up, and pieces of switchboard equipment. These inventions helped the Bell Telephone Company dominate the fledgling market for decades to come. By 1881, however, Watson had grown tired of the telephone business and resigned as general inspector of Bell Telephone to pursue his own interests. After taking an extended vacation in Europe and marrying his fiancée Elizabeth, Watson returned to to the United States and purchased a 60-acre farm near the Fore River in East Braintree, Massachusetts. When the farm proved a failure, he decided to resurrect an old project, the steam engine he had built while working at Charles Williams' machine shop. Together with mechanic L.J. Wing, Watson spent a year trying to perfect and market the engine he had built, but failed to find any backers. In 1885, however, he partnered with engineer and businessman Frank Wellington to found the Fore River Ship and Engine Company. Following the completion of the company's first ship, the Barnacle, Watson and Wellington began receiving a steady string of orders for their high-quality steam engines, commercial vessels of all types, and various pieces of industrial machinery, such as printing presses and electrical lighting equipment. Then, in 1896, they were contracted by the United States Navy to construct two Lawrence-class destroyers, the USS Lawrence and the USS McDonough. Soon, demand grew so high that in 1901, the company was forced to open a new shipyard at a site further downriver at Quincy Point. The new yard allowed the company to take on even larger projects, including the Virginia-class battleships USS New Jersey and USS Rhode Island, and the 7-masted steel-hulled schooner Thomas W. Lawson. The yard also produced ships for foreign clients, including the first 5 submarines for the Imperial Japanese Navy and the battleship ARA Rivadavia for the Argentine Navy. After being purchased by Bethlehem Steel in 1913, the company opened yet another shipyard at Squantum Point, which during the First World War produced 71 destroyers for the U.S. Navy, more than any other American shipyard. Over the next 7 decades, the yard would go from strength to strength, producing hundreds of civilian and military vessels through the end of the Second World War and beyond. One of the shipyard's strangest claim to fame was being the birthplace of a popular 1940s soldier meme, Kilroy Was Here, and for more on this strange phenomenon, please do go check out our previous video, Kilroy Was Here, the story behind one of the first viral memes in modern history. In any event, one of the most successful shipyards in American history, Fore River would remain in service for just over a century, finally closing its doors on June 1st, 1986. But going back to Watson, restless as ever, eventually he grew tired of the shipbuilding business and in 1904 sold his shares in the company. An inveterate dabbler, he served for a time as state treasurer of Massachusetts and then as a paleontologist, having previously completed a 3-year degree in the subject along with his wife. Working with MIT professor William Otis Crosby, Watson participated in geological and paleontological surveys of Boston Basin, even managing to discover a genus of extinct snail that now bears his name, Watsonella. He later traveled to California and Alaska to prospect for gold deposits and completed his long-delayed education by obtaining a Master of Arts from Union College in 1919 and a Doctorate of Engineering from the Stevens Institute of Technology in 1921. Yet even geology and engineering could not satisfy Watson's wandering fancy, and in 1910 he reinvented himself again by joining a touring Shakespearean theater troupe and giving performances across Europe and the United States. But despite his efforts to distance himself from his most famous invention, the telephone remained a constant presence in Watson's life. On January 25th, 1915, he participated in history's first transcontinental telephone call placed between New York and San Francisco. On the other end of the line was none other than his old partner, Alexander Graham Bell. And in his final years, Watson spent his time between theater performances and paleontology seminars, as well as giving lectures on the telephone and the pivotal role he played in its development. In the end, Thomas Augustus Watson died of heart disease on December 13th, 1934 in Paso Roble, Florida at the age of 80. He was buried in his family plot in North Weymouth, Massachusetts, overlooking the former Fore River Shipyard, which he considered his greatest achievement. Far more than a mere sidekick, Watson was a dynamic and passionate individual in his own right, using the freedom afforded by his great wealth to pursue his various passions with maximum gusto. Or, as Watson himself would put it, each science is the study of a way in which the infinite energy expresses itself in the universe, and every attainment one makes in such knowledge carries him a little deeper into the divine mystery. Surely no other justification is needed for such studies.